Under the blistering sun of the New Mexico desert, Calder Wyatt rode alone across the cracked earth, where the only sounds were the wind whispering through juniper branches and the slow, steady clop of his aging horse. He'd been riding half the day, following the faint trail of a lost calf. But more than that, he was outriding himself. A man used to being unnecessary. No one called his name, and no one cried when he was gone. Silence, solitude, predictability. That was all Calder asked from the rest of his life, until he heard the sound. It wasn't loud, wasn't clear, something like wind gone crooked thin, trembling like a breath that had forgotten how to breathe. Calder froze in the saddle, narrowed his eyes, heart slowing. The sound came again, a faint moan, as fragile as thread about to snap. He slipped off his horse, tied the reins to a dead limb, and reached instinctively for the rifle slung across his back before moving quietly through the sparse brush. And then he saw her. Beneath the oldest cottonwood in a clearing stood a girl strung up by the wrists, her arms bound tight to a low-hanging branch with a coarse rope. Her body hung slack feet just inches above the dirt. Long black hair clung to her face, matted with blood and sweat. Her skin was sun-darkened and dust-covered, blending nearly into the color of the ground. Her lips were cracked and blood-stained, but her chest still rose barely. She was alive. Calder's eyes lifted to the crude wooden sign nailed into the trunk above her head. "White man, don't forgive." The letters were jagged, painted in red that had dried into something cruel. He took a step back, stomach tightening. The air thickened around him like a spell had been cast. It wasn't just torture. It was a message, a sentence, a snare. He scanned the area. No fresh tracks. No horses. Just wind brushing over dry leaves like secrets the earth didn't want him to hear. His hand gripped the knife at his belt. "Jesus," he muttered, eyes locked on the girl. "What did they do to you?" She stirred barely. Her head twitched, weak and slow, just enough for him to see the rope bites, raw and bloody, carved into her wrists. Calder stepped closer, each footfall heavy as stone. "Can you hear me?" His voice came out hoarse and low, unsure if he was talking to her or to the part of himself he'd buried. No answer. Only heat rising off her skin like smoke. He reached up, touched the rope. It was old mesquite fiber, rough twisted, meant to hurt, not just to bind. His hand trembled. The words on the sign flashed again in his mind, searing like truth too close to deny. He wasn't one of them. He hadn't set fires. He hadn't put up gallows. But he'd never stopped anyone, either. Until now. "I'm not like them," he whispered. And with one clean cut, the rope gave way. She fell no scream, no fight. Just the soft sound of a body giving out. But Calder caught her arms, wrapping around a form so light it felt empty of bones, as if her soul had almost slipped away. Her eyes fluttered open, black and endless, like the night before a storm. But she said nothing. Only her breath, hot and shallow, lingered on the sleeve of his shirt. He pulled off his coat and draped it gently over her shoulders. "What's your name?" he asked. No answer. "That's all right," he murmured, glancing once more toward the hateful sign swaying in the heat. "If you don't have one, I'll find one for you." And so the loner cowboy stepped out of the dying grove, carrying a girl condemned by someone else's justice, and something unnamed growing inside his chest. Maybe guilt, maybe defiance, or maybe just this simple truth: there was no turning back now. That afternoon, Calder Wyatt returned to his ranch later than usual. The sun had already started to lean westward, casting a warm orange light across the weathered wooden fence and the rust-spotted tin roof. His old horse panted heavily, but Calder didn't stop until he reached the porch. He carried the girl down, saying nothing, and brought her into the one-room wooden cabin, the only place in the world he called home. The room was cooler than outside, thanks to the shade of the overhang and the cloth curtains strung across the windows. He laid her down on the old bed, covered in a thin wool blanket, and went to light the lamp. She didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't resist. She just lay there, breathing softly, trembling like a small bird that had slipped from a hawk's grasp, unconvinced it was still alive. Calder wasn't a man used to tending others. But the hands that had stitched horse wounds, shod hooves, and cleaned rifles still knew how to be gentle. He dipped a cloth in warm water, wiped dried blood from her lips, carefully untangled the matted strands of hair from her forehead, and wrapped soft fabric around her rope-burned wrists. Every movement was deliberate, like he wasn't tending a wounded body, but something sacred, something clinging to life by the thinnest thread. No words were spoken. That silence wasn't heavy, wasn't distant. It was the only language that made sense in that cabin between two people who both knew what it meant to be broken and left behind. When night fell completely, Calder gently slipped his coat from her body and replaced it with a lighter blanket. Then he stepped back. She didn't sleep, though her eyes were closed. He knew. Her body remained slightly curled, bracing, as if expecting a shout. A gunshot, a door slammed open. Calder took his bedroll, placed it by the door, and stepped outside. That night he slept in the barn, his back against the wall rifle beside him, not because he feared her, but because he respected her. The next morning, when he stepped inside, she hadn't moved, but her eyes were open. They followed him not with fear, not with trust, just a watchfulness, like someone who'd learned long ago that nothing is ever given without cost. Calder made beans and placed a bowl on the table. He didn't offer, didn't insist, just said, "Not much, but better than dust and wind." She didn't touch it. But later that afternoon when he came back, the bowl was empty. On the third night he left her one of his old shirts to wear. She didn't look at him, but as he turned to leave, he heard the soft rustle of fabric. She'd put it on. He still hadn't asked her name, partly because he knew she wouldn't tell him, partly because some things don't need to be known too soon. But in the quiet between dabbing her forehead, washing her feet, and tying clean bandages, he murmured, "Lena. I'll call you that. Gentle, steady, like a quiet river winding through stone." She gave no sign, but that night, as he stacked firewood on the porch, he noticed something that made his chest tighten just a bit. She had folded the blanket neatly after waking. Day by day, her gestures began to shift. No thank yous, no smiles. But the way she sat up when he entered the room, the way she used both hands to take the bowl instead of snatching it. Each action was like a seed pushing up through dry, cracked earth. Calder didn't expect words, didn't demand trust. He only needed to know she was still here. And in that delicate glimmering silence between the desert wind and a house without a name, two souls, one who had been running, one who had long been still, began to inch toward one another, slow as sunlight slipping through the window at the edge of dawn. 3 days after Calder gave the girl the name, Lena, strange boot prints appeared beyond the old fence. Fresh treads in the hardened dirt with square heels set deep military issue, the kind only cavalry wore. Calder crouched, studying the tracks, his hand drifting instinctively to the grip of his rifle. A breeze rolled across the low grass, carrying no sound. But he had lived under this sky long enough to know someone was coming. When he stepped back inside, Lena was sitting by the window. She wasn't looking out, but her body had gone stiff, her breath thin like someone who'd just been pulled from deep water. He said nothing. Neither did she. But they both knew the silence had changed color. That afternoon, before the sun had even begun to set, a cavalry rider appeared. His blue coat was sun-faded rifle slung loosely at his back, a crumpled piece of paper in his hand. "You Calder Wyatt?" the soldier asked, reining in at the porch. "Depends who's asking," Calder replied, one hand resting on the post, his stance calm but ready. "Lieutenant Graham, Dust Hollow Station. We're tracking a fugitive." He held out the paper. Faded ink, but clear enough for Calder to recognize the sketched face, sharp cheekbones, long hair, deep-set eyes. Lena. "What for?" Calder asked, voice steady. "Murder. Escaped custody. Dangerous. Might have help from locals." Calder glanced at the poster, folded it, and handed it back. "Haven't seen anyone but jackrabbits and a stubborn cow." The lieutenant squinted gaze, colder now. "This ain't a game, Mr. Wyatt. She ain't just a runaway. They left a body and a message white man don't forgive. She's walking proof of something they want gone. Calder's grip on the rifle strap tightened slightly, but his voice stayed even. If I see anyone, I'll send word, but there's no one here but me. Graham rode off, leaving behind a trail of dust and the feeling of a noose tightening around Calder's neck. When he returned to the house, Lena was standing there, half-shadowed by the dusk spilling in through the window. He didn't say a word, just took off his hat and hung it on the wooden peg near the door. But she looked at him, didn't look away for the first time since he'd cut her down. "They're looking for me," she said. Her voice was hoarse and slow, as though each word had to be pulled from somewhere deep and buried. "I know. You lied." "Yeah." She went quiet for a long while, then sat down on the floor near the door. "I didn't kill anyone," she said, her voice like a whisper to the dust, not expecting to be believed. Calder didn't answer right away. He sat across from her, the only thing between them, a low-burning oil lamp. "You want to tell me what happened?" Lena picked up a small stick and began drawing in the fine layer of dust on the floor. The lines took shape. First a bird, then flames, then a circle wrapping around the creature mid-flight. Calder watched. It wasn't art. It was a symbol. "Bird in fire," she said quietly. "My family's mark. Always flying, always burning." Then she looked up, her eyes dark and full of shadow. "They came in winter, told us we had to leave, said we had to move to dry land, no water, no game. We refused. They called us a threat." She swallowed, clutching the edge of her shirt. "We didn't fight, but they came at night, burned our camp, killed my mother, my 2 brothers, hung my father from the council pole like a warning. I ran, hid. They caught me, said I had a gun, that I was what was left of the resistance, said I needed to be strung up in that tree to draw out anyone still alive." Calder sat in silence for a long time. There was no doubt left in his eyes, now only fury aflame rekindled in a man who thought he'd gone cold. "I believe you," he said, his voice low and solid as stone. Lena stared at him slowly. She didn't cry, but her shoulders for the first time weren't drawn up tight. She didn't know why he said it, only that it didn't feel like charity. It felt like someone had chosen to carry part of her pain with their own. And for the first time, since stepping into this house, she turned away from him, not in fear, but because she didn't want him to see her lips tremble when she whispered, "Thank you." That night, the sky above the ranch was thick with clouds, no stars in sight. A soft wind crept through the loose boards of the old barn, making them groan like ghosts who hadn't found rest. In the small kitchen, Calder sat quietly by the fire, calloused hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the dying embers. After all, Lena had shared something old, stirred in his chest, something he hadn't let move in years. A scar never quite healed, a pain he'd never put into words. Lena stepped in silently. No warning, no hesitation. She no longer curled in corners like she had those first nights. This time she sat across from him, just on the other side of the small fire. Neither of them spoke. The flames crackled softly, casting a warm orange glow across 2 faces, one once smeared with blood and dirt and the other weathered by time. Then Calder spoke. "You're not the only one who lost everything." His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't sorrowful. It was just steady, like a story long buried that had finally found the right silence to surface. "My little sister's name was Ruth, 16. Hard-headed as stone, but her heart." He let out a breath that wanted to be a laugh, but never made it, soft as spring water. He gave a faint smile, but there was no light in his eyes. "Last year I was out hunting when some folks rode in, said they'd been attacked by Apache. Retaliation, they called it. They burned everything we had." Lena stayed still, just tilted her head. She didn't blink. "I got back, and there was nothing left but ash." Then I heard a voice barely coming from the barn. His hands clenched. It was Ruth. She was trapped inside. I didn't go in. I didn't know who was still out there. I was scared of getting shot. I waited for help. By the time it came, she was gone. The room fell so quiet you could almost hear their hearts beating. Lena didn't look at him with pity. She didn't flinch. Her eyes held no judgment, only a kind of knowing that needed no translation. "That's why I cut you down," Calder said, still staring into the coals. "I couldn't hear someone suffer and turn away again." A moment passed before Lena slowly reached out. Not to touch him, just to place her hand flat on the wooden floor just shy of his. Close enough to be seen, not close enough to demand anything. "I heard my mother scream," she said, her voice steady and low, from inside the tent. "When the fire spread, I didn't go in either. I didn't know if she was still alive when I ran, but I ran. I lived, and I carry that with me." Their eyes met without flinching, without measuring, like two cracked mirrors reflecting the same broken shape. The pain between them was no longer separate. It had found company. "When you lied for me," Lena whispered, "I thought you were brave. But now I know you were scared. Just like me." Calder nodded. "Fear's about the only thing I've ever been sure of." Then, without a word, Lena reached out and brushed her fingers lightly across the back of his hand. A small touch, just enough to check if he was real. Calder didn't pull away. He didn't grab her hand either, but he tilted his fingers just enough that his palm rested gently against hers, a space that fit as though it had always been waiting. The fire softened, casting a gentler glow between them. No promises were made. No one mentioned love. But from between broken stories and ash-covered memories, something had begun to take root, not quickly, not brightly, just quietly, and truly. Lena stood first, wordless. But before walking back toward the bed, she said like an old song, half remembered, "Fire took everything from me, but it's also how I found you." Calder didn't respond. But for the first time since she arrived, he looked her in the eyes, not just to understand, but to stay. 2 days after the fire went out, Lena began stepping out into the yard each morning, wrapping herself in Calder's old coat, hauling water buckets, sweeping the stalls, feeding the horses. She didn't say much, but she no longer flinched around Calder either. The small tasks gave rhythm to a life that felt almost peaceful. But Calder knew better. That kind of silence never lasted long. One scorching afternoon, with the sun hanging directly overhead, he spotted dust kicking up to the east. 3 riders, 3 men. As they drew closer, Calder recognized them immediately. Joe Prescott, the self-appointed town security chief, riding in the middle. His hand resting near a pistol Calder knew had killed more than its fair share of unarmed folks. Wyatt Prescott called from a distance, swinging down off his horse like he owned the land. "Heard you might be harboring a girl who don't belong here." Calder didn't flinch. He rested his hand lightly on the wooden railing, eyes calm. "People in Dust Hollow talk more than the wind does." "Cut the jokes," Prescott snapped. "Got someone saw her. Said she's been around here. Long black hair, sharp eyes. Looks like the sketch I've got right here." He pulled out a crumpled wanted poster. Lena's face, rough in charcoal, stared up from the page. Calder barely glanced at it. "I live alone. You want a search, bring a warrant." Prescott spat into the dirt, voice dropping. "My warrant's on my hip, and if you're lying, Wyatt, you'll burn with her." The 3 rode off without entering the house. But Calder knew that wasn't an ending. That was a warning. When he stepped back inside, Lena was already at the window. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. Her eyes were still like the surface of a pond right before a storm. Still but deep, knowing. "They came," she said quietly. He nodded. "And they'll come again. Next time, they'll have a reason to shoot." She turned away, like swallowing something sharp. But when she spoke, her voice held firm. "We can't stay here." Calder replied, and in that word was something close to sorrow, but not quite regret. "I'm not letting them choose who gets to live and who gets buried anymore." That night, as the sky turned violet and the wind died down, they walked out behind the house to the place where Calder had buried the sign. The wooden board still bore the words, faded and dry, as Old Blood White Man Don't Forgive. He dug it up. Dust clung to the letters like dried rust. Together they built a small pyre beside the shallow grave. Lena didn't speak. She just stood beside him. Calder placed the sign in the center and pulled out a box of matches. Before striking one, he glanced at her. "It's not everything people made it out to be. But it's hurt enough, folks, even the ones who never read it," she said softly, ties on the wood. "Like my father." Calder nodded. "Then let's kill it for real this time." He struck the match and touched it to the edge of the wood. The fire caught climbing upward, fast, dancing wild in the breeze. The scent of burning paint and old pine filled the air acrid and fierce. Lena stood still, gripping the edges of her coat. Calder didn't touch her. He didn't need to. The silence between them was its own kind of ceremony. When the word white cracked and curled into flame, the blaze reached its peak, then faded slowly to ash. No one cried. No one spoke. But in that dying firelight, something old inside both of them burned away. It wasn't left behind as proof. It wasn't left for anyone else to use. That night, while the wind lay quiet, Calder sat at the small wooden table and wrote a few lines in a battered leather journal he kept on the shelf. "We leave tomorrow, not out of fear, but because we won't live by old evidence. She doesn't belong in a place that hunts her. And maybe, neither do I." Lena packed only what mattered: a folded wool cloth, a small knife, and the sewing needle her mother once used. As she folded the blanket one last time, she turned to Calder and asked softly, "Have you decided where south?" he said. "Across the border, where no one asks who you used to be." Lena nodded. She didn't look back at the house, not even once. By morning, only 2 sets of hoofprints remained in the dust, and an old wooden door swung gently in the breeze like it was saying goodbye to the last man who ever lived there, and the girl the world once tried to bury alive. They rode out under the moonlight. No whinnying, no firelight, only the soft jingle of reins from time to time, like breath shared between 2 people who had nothing left to lose. Calder rode his old black horse. Lena followed behind on a smaller mare, head lowered over the saddle horn. Her braided hair tucked tight, the coat he'd given her, now faded by desert wind. They crossed the southern lowlands where red soil bled like dried wounds, and gnarled roots jutted from the earth like crushed hands. Every time Calder looked back, he saw Lena's eyes focused, unafraid, but ready. She didn't ask, didn't say where or when. She just rode. They'd gone over 30 miles when Calder spotted a faint ribbon of dust stretching along the eastern horizon. He said nothing, just nudged his horse faster. 10 more miles and the land began to rise jagged ridges and narrow rocky gullies. Calder exhaled. If they made it into the canyon first, they might stand a chance. But just as they neared the break in the rock, gunfire cracked through the night. A sharp blast tore the dark apart. Calder jerked violently in the saddle before slumping to one side, a strangled groan caught in his throat. Blood bloomed immediately across his shirt, dark and fast. Lena screamed, sliding off her horse, running toward where he'd fallen. Another bullet hissed past her, hitting stone just behind her head. "Go," he gasped, trying to push her away, but his hand had no strength behind it. "Shut up," she hissed back, her small frame taut like a bowstring. She hooked her arm under his shoulder, dragging him step by agonizing step toward the rock cleft. With each lurch, his blood left a mark behind each drop, like a vow squeezed from the marrow of loyalty. Two riders crested the slope behind them, rifles raised, but they didn't follow into the canyon. Too narrow, too risky. They knew. Lena used that hesitation to pull Calder deep into the narrowest part of the gulch, pressing him against the cool stone wall. Her whole body was soaked in sweat, but her hands didn't tremble. One hand clamped firm against the wound at his side. "Look at me," she said, voice shaking, but sure. "Don't close your eyes." Calder gave a weak smile, lips already turning pale. "You still haven't told me your real name." Lena looked at him a long moment. Then she took his hand and placed it on her chest over her pounding heart, loud and wild like a war drum. "Ayana," she whispered, lips quivering. "My name is Ayana. My father gave it to me. It means peaceful river. Calder closed his eyes for one breath, then opened them again. In the moonlight filtering through the canyon walls, they shimmered like water breaking through stone. Then I'll live, he said, voice raw, so I can call you that. Every day. Ayana lowered her forehead to his, not crying, just whispering, if we survive tonight, I'll be your wife. Calder breathed. Ragged tried to smile. We will survive. Outside, the hoofbeats faded. Their pursuers had backed off for now. But inside the canyon, between stone and skin, between blood and fragile breath, a vow was made not by priest, not with rings, not witnessed by anyone, only by two souls cast out, choosing each other, like choosing life. Calder had no more strength to speak. Ayana pulled his coat tighter around him, took out a small knife and cut strips of cloth, wrapping the wound with trembling precision. The desert wind slipped through the canyon, sharp and cold, like a warning, but inside her there was no more fear. She had spoken her name. She had made her promise. And for the first time since all those nights strung between life and death, Ayana believed she was stepping into a different life, even if it meant walking through blood and gunfire to reach it. The rainy season came late in the south, but when it finally arrived, the land softened like a mother who'd run out of anger. In a small valley near the border, a place not marked on any map, Calder, Wyatt, and Ayana had built a shelter from wood and animal hide backed up against a low ridge of hills, facing a narrow creek that ran silent through tall patches of wild grass. No fences, no signs, just two people and a patch of earth big enough for life to begin again. 4 months had passed since that bloody night in the canyon. Calder's wound had healed, leaving a long scar beneath his ribs, a faint stitch that reminded him each morning he was alive, because a woman didn't run. As for Ayana, her face still sun-worn, her eyes still deep, but her belly had begun to show beneath the coarse linen dress she'd sewn herself, every stitch woven with quiet dreams. By day, Calder built a horse pen and began breaking in 2 wild mustangs he'd caught near the tree line. He never used a whip, only his steady voice and calm-rooted gaze. The horses kicked and snorted at first, but eventually they bowed to the hand that had once known how to soothe the hurting. Ayana spent her mornings on the tent's wooden porch sewing a tiny white shirt, her lips humming old chants in her native tongue songs only she remembered. Every time Calder saw her like that. Slim frame, gentle back, silhouetted against the dusk sky, his heart slowed just a little, like it was afraid to shatter the moment. They didn't talk much about the past, didn't speak of the soldier with the warrant or the man with the gun who once came to warn them. Those things left behind with the ashes of the sign that read, "White man don't forgive," had no voice here anymore. In the evenings, Calder lit a fire by the front step, and Ayana cooked beans and cornbread in the old iron pot they'd brought from the ranch. At times like that, with the firelight dancing across the walls of their canvas home, it felt like they'd lived there forever. One night, under a sliver moon that hung like a silver thread in the sky, Ayana gently laid the finished baby shirt in Calder's lap. He looked at it, so small, resting in his calloused hands a scrap of white cloth with a few simple wooden buttons. And suddenly, his throat tightened like he was holding a life itself. "I think it's a boy," Ayana said softly, eyes still on the fire. Calder nodded. No reason needed. Then he murmured, "We'll name him River, to remember that some waters, no matter how many stones try to block them, always find their way." Ayana didn't answer, but she reached out, twined her fingers with his, and placed their hands on her belly. There beneath her warm skin something moved softly, and they both went still, like the whole world had gone silent, to listen to what was growing inside her. The days that followed passed in a kind of peace neither of them had ever believed they could have. No shouting, no fleeing. Just 2 souls, one a European-born man whose eyes had once been swallowed by darkness, the other an Apache woman named Ayana, who'd passed her name forward to a child not yet born. One afternoon, while Calder was hauling water from the creek, he spotted Ayana standing on the bank, her hands behind her back, her belly round beneath the golden light. She didn't know he was watching. And in that still frame, Calder realized something he hadn't fully admitted until now. He thought he had saved her from death. But maybe, just maybe, she had saved him from a life where he no longer felt anything at all. The first autumn in that valley arrived as if the land itself wanted to offer two survivors a quiet reward. Leaves from the birch trees drifted down, one by one, covering the path from their shelter to the river, like pieces of old love letters. The wind carried the scent of wild apples' damp wood and the breath of something about to change. Calder built an awning over the horse pen while Ayana began drying herbs and hanging wind chimes from the porch, a tradition from her old camp, where sounds were used to foretell good dreams or bad. One night, when wind rose from the south and the moon slid past the tent's opening, Ayana sat beside Calder, hands resting on her belly, and asked softly, "Do you think we deserve peace?" Calder didn't answer right away. He dropped a piece of kindling into the fire and watched as orange light burst into 1,000 glowing shards in her eyes. Then he said, voice slow and steady, like the earth after rain, "No one's given peace, Ayana, but some people are brave enough to hold on to it. Maybe you're reading these words now living in a world much more modern, cars instead of horses, phones instead of pigeons, borders drawn thinner than a Wi-Fi signal. But if you've ever loved someone the world said you shouldn't because of skin or past or difference, then you understand Calder and Ayana. Their story was never written in history books. There are no statues for them, no folk songs passed down in their name. But buried in the quiet folds of the American West, where love was once hung alongside rope and accusation, they chose to love without asking permission. Wildmercyrides isn't where you'll find perfect heroes or delicate damsels. It's the land of scars, of nameless endurance, and of a kind of love that doesn't ask to be forgiven, because it was never a sin. If you've ever asked yourself, can love survive where bullets fly and bitter words grow like weeds, the answer lies in the hoofprints leading to that riverbank, where a man who lost everything learned how to open his arms, and a woman once crucified by accusation dared to claim love, not as a blessing, but as a right. They didn't need the world's approval. They only needed each other. And you, the one reading this, may not carry a gun or wear a cowboy hat. But if you're standing on the edge of a decision between running and staying, between silence and truth, between fear and courage, then remember them. Remember Ayana, who didn't speak her real name until someone earned the right to hold it. Remember Calder, who never said "I love you" aloud, but built a home from broken bricks and wordless faith. And ask yourself, who is the one I need to cut down from the rope before it's too late? Who is the one who saved me before I knew I needed saving? Don't wait for blood to spill before you call it love. Don't let the person beside you live in the shadow of pretending not to see. You may not own a horse, but you can choose to ride with someone through judgment, through pain, through the quiet ruins of the past, toward a land where it's just the two of you and the heartbeat of something real. Calder and Ayana did it. Not because they weren't afraid, but because they'd lived long enough to know. Between forgiveness and love, love comes first. And sometimes it's the only thing that matters. If that reaches something in you, if you believe love is a journey without borders, without conditions, then Wildmercyrides is a place meant for you. Here every story is a ride through fire. Every character is a declaration. Love doesn't need permission, only a place to live. So ride with us, not just to read, but to remember that somewhere out there, beneath cracked skies and windswept memory, someone is still holding on to someone else for reasons the world may never accept, but can never take away. Subscribe to Wildmercyrides and never miss a heartbeat from the West. Because here we don't promise perfect endings. We only promise this. You'll feel every gust of wind, every rushing vein, every whispered, "I'm still here," that real love knows how to say, whether over gunfire or in the middle of a nameless evening no one else will remember.